Bob Ascah from Abpolecon, and I'm pleased to introduce our guest for this morning's conversation, Graham Thomson. I think most of you know Graham, who has been working the halls of the legislature for over 30 years, veteran columnist, National Newspaper Award winner, has been over in Afghanistan, has contributed chapters to various academic studies. I could go on, but I think most of you know Graham, who is one of the most astute political observers in Alberta on the political scene. So for this morning's conversation, I wanted to set the stage, Graham, for the legislative sitting coming up. Now, right now, this is sort of overwhelmed by the fact that we have a leadership review, which is taking place November 1st and 2nd. In my notes to Graham, I identified a number of key issues, including education, environment, energy, the pension plan, continuing fights with Ottawa, and it goes on and on. And Graham wrote back and said, well, pretty much all topics lead to Smith's leadership review. So I think the summer, let's talk a little bit about the summer leading to where we are today. And your assessment of Smith's summer and the leadership review vote, obviously, forthcoming legislation, and predictions about the leadership vote. So over to you, Graham.
Yeah, so the timeline, first of all, Monday the 28th of October is when the sitting begins, the fall sitting. And then the Friday, November 1st and 2nd, Friday and Saturday is the annual general meeting for the UCP. And the two are really important because what's happening next week is Smith will be bringing in various pieces of legislation ahead of that vote. And even though she won't admit it, those pieces of legislation are really aimed at helping her do well in that vote. Now, you and I are talking right now, Bob. We have not yet, as we speak, seen the government's official, usually it's a news conference beforehand saying what they plan on doing for the fall. We haven't heard that yet. So we're going by what we think is going to happen, but that's been made pretty clear by the Premier. You mentioned the summer into the fall, we had a series of town hall meetings behind closed doors for the members, not for the public, but for the members. Now, a reporter did manage to get in and give us a sense of what was happening there, and that's where the Premier began talking about issues, telling the members, what she plans on doing for the fall. And this is her reaffirming her promise to bring in laws regarding parental rights, or legislation, parental rights, and that's tied into the idea of gender pronouns. She mentioned this last spring, about kids under 16, can't just change their name without the parents being told about it, things like that, plus the Bill of Rights. She had a news conference. She announced changes to the Bill of Rights. I can get that in a second. But the thing is, a lot of things that she's doing, either she is telling people behind closed doors, or she's having a video sent out of her talking. So in the old days, there'd be a news conference with an announcement and reporters there asking questions to, why are you doing this? Very often, she's just skipping that and either talking to people behind closed doors or just having a statement on video or put out a written statement. And then there's no real chance for the media acting as a proxy for the public to push her on why she's doing certain things. And we saw it's not just her talking about, I'll be bringing in legislation in the fall for things that you've been asking me to do. Some of it actually relates back to last year's annual general meeting, where the members passed various pieces of legislation saying, get tough on gender pronouns in schools, parental rights, things like that. But it's also the way she handles the crowds. And one example is chemtrails. This was brought up several times at these closed-door meetings, with town hall meetings, where people brought up the issue of chemtrails. This is the conspiracy-laden theory, they can call it that the jets flying over our heads with the contrails, those are actually chemicals being sprayed into the air to do some sort of mind control of the public. So instead of Smith saying, yeah, that's a conspiracy, that's not true, she said, yeah, I've been told if anyone's doing that, it would be the U.S. Department of Defense. So she doesn't actually shoot it down. She actually reaffirms it in many ways. Of course, when that came out, and the thing is, she didn't want to alienate her base, because the base are the people that Jason Kenney once called the lunatics taking over the asylum. Like she has courted those people during leadership race. They helped bring down Jason Kenney. They helped make her leader of the UCP. And now she is beholden to them and doesn't want to irritate any of them. So she says things like, yeah, if anybody's doing the chemtrails, better talk to the Pentagon. Well, the media did. And the Pentagon says, well, no, we're not. Talk to NORAD. And of course, NORAD says, what the hell? But this is something.
Well, Graham, just comment on that. I mean, isn't this strategic on the part of Smith that it's a distraction? And there are a lot of really important issues that are boiling up, not only in education, public strikes that may be taking place, the environment. I mean, nothing's been done about the tailings ponds up north. The fact that in rural Alberta, municipalities are not being paid for taxes. I mean, doesn't she enjoy this sort of thing? Does she purposefully drop these kinds of things to get the media away from really the main issues?
Well, thing is, and in some ways, absolutely. She is, even her office staff call it her going back to the old days of being a radio talk show host, where she'd bring out ideas. She said, no, just throwing things at the wall, see what would stick, conspiracy theories, whatever. She does that as premier, but it's also very often she believes these things. Like during the pandemic, as a radio show host, she was talking about ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine as possible treatments for COVID, which are completely debunked. But she does this and does it as a premier. But right now, she is shackled to that leadership review. And you're right, there are so many issues going on right now. But again, look at the issues. Albertans are talking about healthcare and the cost of living. But the resolutions, there's 35 of them coming up at this party convention on the 1st and 2nd. And they're dealing a lot with gender issues, the transgender issues. They're dealing with issues that Albertans aren't talking about, the parental rights and things like this. So they're focused on issues that Albertans are not focused on. And she is, in a sense, one way, I think she agrees with a lot of this stuff, but also she's been drawn into it. It's something that she's done to herself. Jason Kenney did the same thing, and she's learned a lesson from Kenney. He did, court the more fringe elements to become leader and win the election in 2019, but he actually then got bitten by the same people. They began getting irritated with him during the pandemic, so blah, blah, blah. The thing is, they helped bring him down, 51% approval rating in his leadership review. And that was like 16,000 people. It was a mail-in ballot. This time around, Smith has learned her lesson. And it's not 16,000 people. It's only 5,000 will turn up. This is a huge convention, by the way. When it comes to conventions in Alberta history, 5,400 are registered. That is gigantic. The record was 3,700, and that was set last year by the UCP members. And so she could be she won't be brought down. I think she's got to pass it, and they'll be busing people in by the busload. But she wants to do well in that, and she's worried about that. And that's because she knows that these members can get irritated with her. I talked to David Parker, head of, he was a co-founder of Take Back Alberta, a very socially conservative group. He told me a few months ago that, she has nothing to fear from me, or I won't give her any trouble. But then even more recently, he's been a bit more equivocal. But also he's told me that you just can't tell the members what to do and Take Back Alberta. It's very grassroots, he says. And there's members there who still upset with her. They thought that she should do more to get that pension plan brought in. Like, forget a referendum, just do it.
Yes, right.
That they're angry with her for not doing enough to somehow defend people charged in the Coutts border blockade. So, and she learned the hard way. You don't get involved in court cases, but they still think she should have done more. And that also she's not fighting against Ottawa hard enough, and she's doing her best. So again, even we're discussing the fall sitting starting. it goes back to the leadership review. Even a few weeks ago, like 3 weeks ago, she made an ultimatum to the federal government saying to Trudeau and about the Impact Assessment Act. This is a federal act that the Minister of the Environment federally can look at big projects, oil sands or offshore drilling or whatever, that the federal government can look at this and make a determination should this go ahead. Now, she has fought this in court. The Supreme Court said in many ways the law is unconstitutional. They're changing the law, amending it. But Smith has said to the Prime Minister, you have until November the 1st to make these amendments that we want you to make to give us, recognize our provincial authority, blah, blah, blah. Thing is, that deadline is when her convention begins. So again, she can make a speech to the people, like 5,000 people, it looks like, and say, hey, I gave him this ultimatum, and once again, he is ignoring me, because, we're assuming he's not going to do what she tells him to do, that Trudeau will go ahead and do what he wants to do, and she's going to say, once again, they're ignoring me. See, I am standing up for Albertans. And so, again, fall sitting, but so much is all about that leadership review on the 2nd of November, on the Saturday. The session starts up next week, and we'll start to see them, as she's told us, bring in various pieces of legislation.
Okay, that's great, Graham. And maybe we can just cross the aisle. And although Nenshi doesn't have a seat yet, he's had a busy summer, but a low-key summer. Can you maybe explain a little bit of your assessment, analysis of his work over the summer?
Yeah, I talked to him about that. I did a column for the Toronto Star and interviewed him on this very point, saying what happened to Nenshi. Of course, he wins the leadership race, 86%. It's a huge number of votes for him. And then he kind of went underground. And he said, look, he spent the summer talking to members. He did a lot of backyard barbecue type things. It didn't make a lot of splash in the newspapers or on television and radio. And he said, what he's trying to do here, of course, is he's not a longtime member of the NDP. He just joined it before the leadership race, joined it, and then he was given permission to run. He wasn't a member before. In fact, he's been critical of the NDP in the past, and they gave lukewarm endorsement during last year's election, basically saying that the lesser of two evils. So he has to try and bond with the NDP, the grassroots level, and he's been doing that over the summer. And now with the session starting up, there's pressure on him from the Premier to somehow, get into a by-election somehow. There's a by-election in Lethbridge West, has yet to be called. That's one that Shannon Phillips, of course, has stepped down. There'll be a by-election there. He is not running there. He's saying basically, he's not from Lethbridge. He wants to maybe, he wants somebody who's from the area to be the MLA, and then he's more interested in running eventually in Calgary. He also, in that interview, by the way, said he'd be interested in potentially in Edmonton too. And I brought up the issue of, I know Rachel Notley, the former leader, who's from Edmonton, Strathcona. I said, would you run there? He said, well, look, it's up to her. She's wonderful. Rachel Notley is a great politician, great leader. And if she was to step down, I certainly look at that. But he is in no hurry. And I actually believe him saying he is no hurry to get into the legislature, doesn't have to get into the legislature. The thing is, we have relatively short sittings. They're 4 or 5 weeks at a time, especially in the fall. It starts at the end of October and it runs until early December. It doesn't last that long. So he is saying there's no real rush to get in there. But also, he is not going to try and force somebody to step down. Of course, you think back to Smith. When she became UCP leader, there was an opening in Calgary Elbow, and she did not want to run there because there was no guarantee she would win. Then she had somebody step down. Of course, an MLA stepped down, and Medicine Hat, she ran there and won. But it's a bit different for a leader of an opposition. If you're the premier, you can promise a lot of things to people to step down. You step down and wink, wink, nudge, nudge, I can give you things. Opposition leader, not so much. So I think he wants to run eventually. I'm thinking probably sometime next year. But it means at this point, someone has to step down for him to do that. So, but getting back to Nenshi, also, and I think he hasn't been doing, I talked to the NDP about this, is that they were for a while, especially under Notley, just every day putting out a news release, a news conference to attack the government. And it becomes tiresome. It's just all the time attack, attack, attack. And then she wants to be a lot more positive, he said. He has to do a balance. And that is, criticize the government. We can discuss Bill 20. They're changing parts through regulations. Bill 20, this is dealing with local civic governments. And but he said, you can attack that, but you also got to be positive. You got to bring out issues that you're going to say we're going to do better on. And one is healthcare. And he said he's going to have an MLA, a doctor, travel the province, get a sense of what should be done in healthcare, and then next year have a really detailed policy on that front. So yes, relatively low profile, meeting with members, not being critical every day. That gets tiresome. People don't want to be negative all the time. And the party members don't want the party to be seen as just a negative voice, more positive things. And so what's going to happen during the fall sitting is he'll be sitting in the public gallery, or members gallery, whatever, watching the day's events question period, and then they'll be available to talk to the media outside, because he's not a member of the legislature, obviously. So that's what's going to happen. It's a tactic. We'll see what happens. When Danielle Smith won the Wildrose leadership in 2009, she had no seat until 2012 in that general election. Now, mind you, she was not leader of the party that was the official opposition. She was, Rump Party had one MLA. But you can be a leader speaking outside the legislature. You can't do that forever, but you can do it for a certain relatively short period of time.
But just back to Nenshi Summer then for a minute, Graham. What did he tell you about what he heard in the coffee shops and from members and so on that might translate into a policy perspective?
Yeah, it's interesting. The thing that, you really can never trust politicians who say, I heard in the coffee shop that people are angry at the government and want it to fall. He didn't quite put it that way. But I think what he's hearing, especially from his members and people in his caucus, and that is, don't be constantly negative. But in terms of policy, that's an interesting one, because we have to see where they're going to go on issues like, do they cut ties with the federal NDP? And this is an issue he brought up during the leadership race. He's very firm on that. We should actually cut ties. But that's something the membership will decide. And that's going to be at the general meeting sometime next year. So there's nothing actually coming up quickly on that. But I think that he is looking at ways of making the NDP different under him than it was under Rachel Notley, a bigger tent. And I think we will see, of all the leadership contenders, he is the most, I guess in a sense, pro-oil. Like even though he wasn't getting into, the thing is, he wasn't getting into specific policies or promises during his leadership campaign, and he's not doing that now, because he says things can change over the next 3 years in terms of issues like the carbon tax. We may have a federal government, conservative government, that is going to scrap the federal price on carbon. And that's going to change the whole dynamic in terms of where Alberta stands, where the UCP stands. So he's being really careful when it comes to right now, not saying what he wants to do. He wants the party to decide. You can say it's a cop-out, but the thing is, you make promises right now about policy on your own without the party supporting you, and all of a sudden things could change dramatically in the next 3 years. So he wants to, before the next election provincially, and it's not going to be held until the fall of 2027. So I think that when it comes to policy, we'll have to wait and see what he has planned. He's saying he's taking a slower approach to doing things like that.
Right. On an organizational basis, Graham, then any change in the party office personnel, and also what's your sense of his rapport with members of his caucus?
Yeah, I think there's no big change. It's not like when Kenny became leader of the UCP and then tossed out all the Brian Jean acolytes in the party. No, and the thing is, he's in a kind of weird position in a sense. Well, weird, but he is not leader of the official opposition. He is leader of the NDP, but happens to be the official opposition. Christina Gray, the MLA, is the official leader in the House of the official opposition. No, there was no big purge. There are people I talked to who are no longer there, but these are the people behind the scenes, like some of the staff members behind the scenes. They've moved on, but it wasn't like a purge. This is just something, you have a new leader of the party came in, and now there's been some changes. But as for the members, I've talked to the members, and they're quite excited about this. Of course, again, you got to be careful, right? I don't hear the grumblings from the NDP. You do hear grumblings, hey, listen, they're under Kenny. It was just constant. I was talking to UCP MLAs who did not like him. In fact, it came from all sides. The more right-wing members, more moderate members were grumbling about Kenny, basically because they saw him as a dictator and no longer the grassroots guarantee guy. But I think the NDP right now, they're thinking, look, we did really well in that leadership race in terms of he won the leadership race. We were positive in that race. We weren't attacking each other. So let's build on this. And also the party, by the way, has changed. Almost half the members now are from Calgary. Edmonton is a traditional base for the NDP. Of course, every MLA in this city is NDP. Calgary, 12 out of 24 seats. I'm doing my math here. I probably got it wrong, but most seats in Calgary are NDP. So Calgary has become a lot more important to the NDP. So there's a sense right now, people have joined the party recently. They're not longtime members. So what does that mean? So I think right now, he has a lot of sway in that party, but he's not going out as a dictator to say, we're going to do the following. He's trying to ease his way in, and that's part of his plan over the summer to get to know the members, but also have them get to know him. And a lot of the members are new members, as opposed to people who've been around for decades.
In his town hall speech in Calgary, which was open to the public, he really emphasized the notion of a movement and growing the movement. So he's not satisfied with 85,000 members. He wants to, at least what he said, grow the number. And it is by far the largest party in the country, provincial party. And looking forward to the federal scene, it would be very interesting, given if Jagmeet Singh is steps down as leader, that Alberta's members would have a heavy weight on that outcome. But that's a bit of an aside. Now let's just turn, Graham, to the question of the legislature sitting coming up next week. What do you see as some of the key issues that are going to be debated and reported in newspapers and television and so on?
Well, there's two major issues we're looking at. One is the Bill of Rights. This is the idea that she's announced this. She's going to do 3 changes to the Bill of Rights, amend the Bill of Rights. We'll see how that goes. But there's the right, basically, to refuse vaccinations. The right for a person to have control over their own bodies, that they can choose not to have a certain medical treatment or whatever. The thing is, this is aimed at the willfully unvaccinated during the pandemic. That is what it's all about. And during leadership race 2022, she was talking about changing the Human Rights Act in Alberta to give people legal protection to say no. Not to say no, but also not be penalized. If you're a healthcare worker and refuse to get vaccinated, you got a problem in Alberta under the pandemic. But now she seems to want to say, hey, you're a healthcare worker, you don't want to get vaccinated, well, they can't punish you for that under the Bill of Rights. We'll see if that was what's going to happen, and heaven forbid we have another pandemic. But this is her way of appeasing that base. So giving them autonomy over their bodies, that's what they're calling it. That's really about refusing to get vaccinated. And by the way, a bit of background, Smith did use this during the leadership races, I pointed out, on the Human Rights Act. But she came to cabinet. I was told by a person in the room at the time that she wanted to push this. She's premier at this point, before the election, wants to bring in changes to the Human Rights Act. And a lot of pushback from cabinet saying, we can't do this, especially before an election. Most Albertans supported the pandemic restrictions, at least 2/3, maybe 3/4 at some point. And so you cannot force this on people, that tell people, look, we're changing the Human Rights Act. So she backed down from that. Then she had Preston Manning, of course, do that review of how the government operated during the pandemic. And one of his ideas was, hey, you could use the Bill of Rights. to give people protection. And that's what she's doing to the Bill of Rights. Also, property rights, the right to own property. I don't see how that is something new, but also basically the right to bear arms. Very Americanized idea that you're allowed to buy or get yourself a gun, weapon, whatever, a rifle, and you can use that, safely, of course. But you're thinking, well, that's not really necessary either. But it's very Americanized, this idea of the right to bear arms. And again, this comes from her members. These changes came up through the membership. We saw some of the resolutions last year. And this is something most Albertans are not asking for this, but she's doing it because of her base. The second thing is changes legislation regarding parental rights and gender issues in schools. The idea that a child under 16 can't change their gender pronoun until the parents agree to it. There's also issues, medical issues, which again, this is not a big issue with most people in the province, but it's a big issue with her socially conservative base. So we'll see what the details of that next week. Now, she promised this back in February, didn't bring it in February. To me, what's happened, this is a big issue back in that leadership, the AGM last year. The idea, parental rights and gender pronoun issues came up last year, and she was deliberately holding that off until now. Again, to tell her members, hey, remember, just a few days ago, I brought in legislation to do all of this, things you were asking for, so give me a big round of applause and vote yes, that you want me to stay on as leader. So this is, again, going back to the idea, the sitting is starting. Yes, there's legislation coming in, but it's very much not aimed at what Albertans are asking for, it's what her base is asking for. But it has implications for all of us in the province because these things are going to affect us in the province, not just her members. So this is something, as for her leadership review, how's she going to do? I think she's going to do fine. But she is obviously worried about this. There's talk of people being busted, as I mentioned earlier, to make sure that she survives this, actually does well on it. Again, you go back to Jason Kenney got 51.4%. And so 49% roughly voted against him, 16,000 people. This time around, it's only 5,000 people. His vote was by mail. This one was actually in person. And they could cause major problems. It's not just a matter of, she won't lose the vote. I'm pretty sure of that. But how high will she get?
So what's the threshold, Graham, in your opinion? Is it 70%?
Yeah, I would say it's probably 70%. Anything below that, all of a sudden you get 60%, then you're getting pretty close to half the party. 70%. The thing is, though, I bet in her mind, she says, well, look, as long as I get 53%, like I got in the leadership race, 53%. The thing is, that was against other candidates. This time she's running against herself. So she needs to do quite well. Remember, Ralph Klein used to get like 80, 90%. He got 55% in his final one in 2006. People said, hey, Ralph, it's time for you to go. Even though he had announced he was going, he kept delaying announcing a certain date, and they kind of booted him out that way. But this time around, she's got to do well enough that she wants to say, I'm in control of the party. So if she gets, thinking back to the leadership race, that then she got, I think it was 86%. I know she'd love to get 87%. Again, leadership race versus a review. But I think it's 70%. But quickly, a bit of trivia here. Alison Redford and Stelmach got 77% at their leadership reviews. Now, they were under a lot of pressure to leave, but what happened, I've talked to people who are organized in favor of these premiers at the time leaders, and they bust people in, and they got 77%, but both of them were forced out. About a year or so, Stelmach was gone within just over a year, and Alison Redford was gone in a matter of 3 or 4 months. She was forced out. So these numbers sometimes aren't real, but you got to think, Redford and Stelmach had people waiting to take over, pressure from the party to get out. I don't see that here with the general membership wanting to force her out, and I don't see anybody in the wings to say, yeah, I'm ready to go. So that's in her favor. But again, I think she needs to get 70, 75% just to put everything else to rest. You could say, well, still a quarter are against her. But if you're a leader and get 75%, the thing is, she's a very divisive person. You see the polls. Even though Albertans get 49% roughly, she's kind of holding firm at that. But she has more negatives than positives in the eyes of many Albertans. So I don't see her getting 90%. But something, we'll see. She's going to survive. The question is going to be, how big will that number be? And will it cause problems for her after the 2nd of November?
Now, we only have a few more minutes left, Graham, and I wanted to bring up the question that right now there are a number of strikes in the offing.
Yeah.
The education sector, they've been put into a disputes resolution type of process. The nurses are very, very unhappy. The doctors' agreement hasn't been signed and so on. So potentially we have a session that's going to maybe consumed about labor strikes. Do you have any sense, Graham, about whether the government will be prepared to legislate the workers back if they go on strike?
Yeah, well, it's a tricky thing, right, when it comes to the right to strike. Nurses have the right to strike. Of course, these things, if nurses go on strike, they don't shut the hospitals down. They have an emergency staff to do this. And I don't know, maybe I'm stretching this too far in terms of all roads leading back to the leadership review. But I got to say, I imagine it doesn't hurt her to be on stage and maybe mention this, or at least people be aware that she is not, buckling down to the unions at this point. Like, she's not giving them what they want. So I remember Ralph Klein would say about public sector unions, if they're not complaining, you're doing something wrong. If they are complaining, you're doing something right. And in fact, Kenny used that same line at his party convention. It was just after he won the election. He was talking about a big protest outside the convention hall by, I think it was healthcare workers. And he said, if they're not complaining, I must be doing something wrong. So if they're complaining, I'm doing something right. So there's that sense that if public sector unions are upset with you as a premier, then that plays well with the conservative crowd. And I don't know if they're going to go as far as trying to force them back to work. But at the same time, they're playing to a base. They'd be very happy to see the workers forced back to work. And I think, something, I don't know what's going to happen with that, to be honest, but I know right now there's no incentive for them to make a deal with anybody that makes it look like they have caved into union demands ahead of that leadership review.
Well, Graham, let's leave it at that. There's so much to talk about, and we haven't really even touched my long list of policy issues. Fascinating stuff. Again, thank you for your time.
Well, thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure.